Hello, everybody. I'm Bobby Salveson.
And I'm Michael Monaco, and we're the Hazmat Guys. This is Ask the Hazmat Guys, answering your questions.
So let's take a look in the old mailbag and see what we got here. We have a question about, do we need to ground and bond?
Is a pass alarm required on my SCBA?
And we have another question about, what are the differences between Mexican placards, labels, and markings and the U.S. ones?
Can I use knee pads on the outside of a level A?
Okay, my first question is from John Robichaud from Mississauga Fire and Emergency Services, and he says, the only type of transfer we do is pump diesel out of saddle tanks. We do a full grounding for this operation. Is there a redundancy considering the product? And that's a really great question, but I'm probably not the right guy to ask, because where I come from, grounding is not very popular, but in the Southwest, it is Bible. Okay, so there's a lot of things that you have to consider. So I'm going to list a bunch of things that I consider, and I'll explain why it's not very popular where I am. So for the case of diesel, it's not flammable until it's about 140 degrees Fahrenheit-ish. So that doesn't mean that it's not hot enough on the ground where it can go. It is 140 degrees. Another thing is, do we have a foam line stretched and ready? Do we have the guys with the proper training? Do we have proper PPE? Do we have the equipment, right? So to move the diesel, you need pumps, pools, hoses, the appliances like the stingers and the couplings. And do we have the right amount of containment? Do we need to move it in the first place? Can we recycle? Can we do a million other things that are out there? What is the quantity? Can we use pads? All right, something very simple. We can put it in a bag and be done with it. Where is the rig in relation to the openings on the street, like manholes and storm drains and that kind of thing? Or where is the leak actually? Is it on the top of the tank, on the bottom of the tank, in the hose lines? Where is the rig in the first place? Is it on top of a bridge? Is it in a low place? Is it next to a waterway? Here's probably the three biggest ones: temperature, humidity, and dew point. This is most of the reason why we don't do very much grounding and bonding, is because where I come from, it's wet and warm. Ish. But in the Southwest, it is extremely dry, and it is either very cold or very hot, and those things are not conducive. So that goes in with the whole flow rate of the fuel. So as it runs through those hoses, it creates more static. And the pumping type is obviously going to impact it as well. If you're doing manually done or pneumatically done, two different things. And lastly, what's your fuel? You know, we pump up where I live gasoline, and we don't ground and bond because we found that it really doesn't matter whether you have a metal drum on the ground or you actually ground and bond. The difference is negligible. So I would say test it out, see what it's all about. But if your department SOB is to ground and bond, then, my friend, that's what you're doing. See you out there.
Okay, so this next question is actually going to come into the category of a walk-up. It didn't come via email. It certainly didn't come via voicemail. It actually came while me and Bob were talking at a conference, and after the show, a gentleman came up to us, and I wish I could remember his name, and I wish I could remember where he's from, but I really can't, and I'm truly sorry about that. But he posed a very interesting question, and his question was kind of a twofold question. The first part of his question was, am I required to wear a pass alarm inside of my level A suit? Then the next question kind of feeds off of that. If I'm not, am I able to take and disable the pass alarm that's currently on my SCBA and wear that inside of a level A? Okay, so let's reach question number one. Do I have to wear a pass alarm inside an SCBA? The answer to that is no, absolutely you do not. The standards that require you to wear a pass alarm inside your or with your structural firefighting gear actually comes from the fire grounds. Those people that are using their SCBA to go into a fire type situation, you land under a specific standard within the NFPA, and you are required to have an SCBA that has a pass alarm in it, and that pass alarm has to be activated when you turn on the bottle. However, there is a whole group of hazardous materials responders within industry that do not have to wear the pass alarms because their SCBAs land within a different standard. So one standard says you have to wear it if you're doing this job, and the other standard says you don't have to wear it if you're doing this job. So do you have to wear it in a level A? No, you don't. The next part of that question is, since I don't have to wear it, am I able to disable the pass alarm from the SCBAs that we have? So obviously this comes from a firefighter. They've got a whole bunch of Scott packs, not Scott packs, but SCBAs. I apologize. We call them Scott packs because ours are from Scott, but it can be any SCBA manufacturer. He says, we got a bunch of them. We only use them for levels A's. Can we just pull the batteries out? And this is kind of a very touchy subject. And I talked to a couple different people who I would consider to be standards experts. And the opinions kind of wobbled back and forth a little. But for the most part, they all said that if you took that pass alarm and that pass alarm with that SCBA lands within a specific NFPA standard, and you pulled that pass alarm out, it does not mean that SCBA automatically turns around and defaults to a different standard. It literally means that pack no longer falls within an NFPA standard. Whereas the other sets of packs that don't have it, they come out in that standard. So from an NFPA point of view, your mask will kind of land in this nowhere zone. And backing off of that, you kind of put yourself in a lot of liability, okay? Because let's think about it like this. You turn around and you disable the pass alarms, and for some reason, somebody gets hurt from that Scott pack or just any kind of accident, all right? The first thing that they're going to do is they're going to start combing through the gear. They're going to look at all the level A stuff. They're going to look at all your equipment, and they're going to do an inspection of the Scott pack or the SCBA. Once they do that and they determine that this mask has been tampered with and no longer properly works the way that it was designed and bought to work, you've got some serious questions that you're going to be answering. At best, you're going to get reamed out, and at worst, you're going to be held civilly liable and possibly criminally liable for taking a NFPA certified piece of equipment and disabling it to the point that it no longer fit into that standard, and then allowing somebody to use it in an emergency. So I definitely would not pull the batteries out of my pass alarm. If you interpret this differently, please feel free to reach out and email me. If you can provide justification for your reason, that's even better. But I talked to a couple people who are I would consider to be pretty well versed in this, and this was kind of the statement or the feeling or the way in which they leaned.
All right, my second question comes from Jason Grenwald from Midland, Texas, and he says, what are the differences between Mexican placards, labels, and markings and the U.S. version? That's a great question because I had no idea. So I did a little research and I didn't find very much, but I found some things that were interesting in my opinion. So Mexico does not use the dangerous placard or label on their transports. In NOM-004, it says so, and it seems that the NOM is their regulations, though I could not find anything newer than 1999. Another point is on the packing slip, the product is in both Spanish and English, even though NOM-002 STC2 1994 says the proper shipping name has to be in Spanish. Another one is they cannot use the hot placard to identify something that's, hot, I guess. This is also the same in Canada, which I did not know. They use an elevated temperature mark as provided in the UN recommendation. Mexico also does not need a marine pollutant marking. They do recognize consumer products, although they do not recognize ORMDs. And that's a weird one. But they also don't distinguish between flammable and combustible liquids. Only the U.S. splits the line between the two. It seems that everything is flammable down there. Thanks a lot for the question, and keep them coming, guys. Thanks.
Another question that was posed at the Baltimore conference, and again, I didn't write down names, and I apologize for this. They asked, can I use knee pads on the level A? So this came up because we were sitting and we were talking about myths of hazmat. And one of the things that was said was that you have to be very careful because your ensemble is tested to a very, very, very specific standard. And everything on that ensemble is tested to a specific standard. And the moment that you put something on the ensemble that isn't tested to that standard, then it basically voids the standardness of the standard. That sounds very weird, but it's true. And this is the reason that chem tape came about. Right, because a lot of teams were using duct tape, and the people who make chem tape turned around and said, "Wait a second, you can't use that. That chem tape, that duct tape, has not been approved to be compliant with the standard. So we don't know if the adhesive on the tape is going to help push chemicals through. So they developed the tape that met the standard and can be used with the ensemble. So hence the birth of chem tape and like $90 per roll. Either way, anytime you take something and you add it to your ensemble, you basically change that ensemble and you almost void the standard. So it hasn't been approved with that product on it. Now, with that being said, standards aside, I would also be very careful about knee pads because you may have a result or a consequence of putting on knee pads that you were actually trying to prevent. This conversation came up when we were talking about kneeling in a level A, and somebody raised their hand. They said, "Oh, well, what about knee pads?" And you think about this. You put a set of knee pads on the outside of a level A, and you are walking around. You could actually be causing the material through friction to wear out faster than it was supposed to. So now you're constantly walking, you're constantly rubbing this material up against the pad. It exceeds what it was designed to, and you start to wear out the chemical protection layers, and now you have an area where chemicals can penetrate. So I would be really, really careful with putting things onto a level A that the manufacturers did not design them to be. What I would do instead was keep some pads with me, acid pads, oil pads, anything along those lines. And you can always fold them up, put them on the floor, and then kneel on the pad itself. You get the comfort of a knee pad, but you don't violate any kind of standard, and you don't put that level A into any level of risk by abrasion, by rubbing it up, by possibly putting something up against, having it press up against the suit where chemicals can get in between, and now it can't run off the suit. It's pushing up against the suit. There's all sorts of different possibilities. So don't do it. I don't recommend it. I would also be careful about wearing knee pads inside the level A suit. Not for the same reason, but for a slightly different reason. So now I have most of the knee pads that I can think of have a very hard surface on the outside. Now you're going to kneel, and you're going to place a very hard surface, now two very hard surfaces between that level A suit. You have the ground, and then you have your knee pad. And that may be a situation that's going to cause that suit to abrade faster than if you had no knee pads on whatsoever. Honestly, I take a piece of pad, absorbent pad, I fold it up, and I use that as my cushion.
Well, that wraps up another episode of Ask the Hazmat Guys.
You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or our YouTube channel at the Hazmat Guys.
If you'd like to send us a question for us to answer, call our comment hotline at 843-628-1484, or send us an email at feedback@thehazmatguys.com.
And remember, don't just get on the job, get into the job.